Winter had settled over Blackwood Hall with the quiet authority of an old monarch. Beyond the towering windows, frost silvered the gardens and wrapped the sleeping countryside in a pale veil, but inside the ducal residence every corridor glowed with wealth. Hundreds of candles burned beneath crystal chandeliers. Their light danced across polished marble floors and gilded mirrors, illuminating a world where appearances were treasured more carefully than truth. On that evening the great dining hall glittered like a jewel box. The most distinguished guests in the county had gathered beneath its vaulted ceiling. Noblemen discussed politics over crystal goblets. Ladies adorned in satin and pearls exchanged practiced smiles. Silver cutlery flashed beneath the candlelight, and servants moved soundlessly between the long rows of diners, carrying dishes rich enough to feed entire villages. Yet beneath the elegance lingered something far less beautiful. Expectation. Judgment. The merciless curiosity of society. At the center of the table sat Lady Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess of Ashbourne. She was 27 years old and possessed the sort of beauty painters struggled to capture. Her chestnut hair shimmered beneath the candles. Her pale blue gown flowed around her like water. Her posture remained perfectly poised despite the weight she carried. Only those who studied her carefully would notice the strain behind her composure. 5 years. 5 years of marriage. 5 years without a child. In every drawing room across England, whispers followed her name. Poor thing. The Duke deserves an heir. Perhaps she is barren. The cruelest judgments were always spoken softly. Eleanor had learned that long ago. She lifted her wineglass with graceful fingers while pretending not to notice the occasional glance directed toward her. The guests thought themselves discreet. They rarely were. At the opposite end of the table sat her husband, Sebastian Blackwood, Duke of Ashbourne. Tall, broad-shouldered, and devastatingly handsome, he possessed the kind of presence that commanded attention even in silence. Dark hair framed a face carved with aristocratic precision. His expression revealed little. It almost always revealed little. The Duke spoke sparingly. When he entered a room, conversations shifted. When he offered an opinion, others listened. When he withdrew into silence, no one dared disturb him. Years earlier, Eleanor had mistaken that reserve for strength. Now she knew better. Distance could wear the same face as dignity. Throughout dinner, Sebastian barely looked at her. He acknowledged guests, answered questions, discussed estate matters. But his gaze never lingered upon his wife. The omission hurt more than outright hostility. Across from Eleanor sat the Dowager Duchess, Sebastian's mother. Though age had softened neither her features nor her opinions, she maintained the polished elegance expected of her station. "My dear Lord Harcourt," she said lightly, setting down her fork, "your grandson has grown remarkably. 6 years old now, is he not?" "7," Lord Harcourt replied proudly. The Dowager smiled. "How fortunate. There is no greater comfort than seeing one's family line secured." The words floated through the room. Several guests exchanged glances. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. The conversation moved exactly where everyone expected it to move. Children. Inheritance. Legacy. The subject she had spent years dreading. A lady farther down the table laughed softly. "The future of great houses depends upon such blessings." "Indeed," another agreed. "The responsibility must be tremendous." The Dowager's eyes drifted toward Eleanor. The look lasted only a moment. Felt like a blade. Eleanor lowered her gaze to her untouched meal. 5 years ago she had entered this house full of hope. She had imagined companionship, affection, perhaps even love. Instead she had become a symbol of failure. Not because she lacked kindness. Not because she lacked intelligence. Not because she lacked devotion. Because she lacked a child. The conversation swelled around her like rising water. Names. Births. Future heirs. Each word tightened the invisible noose. Then Lord Harcourt chuckled. "At least Ashbourne remains young. Plenty of time yet." The room fell strangely quiet. Every guest understood the implication. Every guest waited. Sebastian placed his wineglass upon the table. The faint sound of crystal touching would seem unnaturally loud. At last he looked directly at Eleanor. The hall became still. Even the servants appeared to hesitate. His expression revealed nothing. No anger. No tenderness. No mercy. Only cold certainty. "I require an heir, Lady Eleanor." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Several guests froze. Others lowered their eyes. Nobody spoke. Sebastian continued calmly. "I require an heir, not excuses." A sharp breath escaped someone near the end of the table. Eleanor felt heat flood her face. Humiliation spread through her chest with such force she thought she might stop breathing. The candles blurred. The room seemed suddenly too bright, too crowded, too silent. Yet she refused to cry. Not here. Not before them. The Duke leaned back slightly in his chair. "If this marriage cannot provide one," he said, his voice measured and clear, "then its purpose has already failed." The word struck harder than any slap. For one terrible moment, Eleanor heard nothing. Not the crackle of candles. Not the rustle of silk. Not the pounding of her own heart. Only the echo of his sentence. Its purpose has already failed. 5 years reduced to a verdict. 5 years reduced to a disappointment. Slowly, her hand slipped beneath the table. Her fingers touched the sealed letter hidden within her pocket. It had arrived that afternoon. Unopened. Mysterious. Important enough that she had carried it with her all evening. As tears threatened the edges of her vision, she felt the paper beneath her fingertips. A strange calm settled over her. The hall waited for her humiliation. The guests expected silence. Submission. Perhaps tears. Instead, Eleanor rose. The scrape of her chair shattered the stillness. Every face turned toward her. Even Sebastian seemed surprised. She drew a slow breath and met her husband's eyes for the first time that evening. Pain remained there. But something else had appeared beside it. Resolve. Her fingers tightened around the letter concealed in her pocket. Then, with a steadiness that astonished even herself, she spoke. "Then perhaps, Your Grace," she said quietly, "it is time the truth was finally spoken." For several heartbeats after Eleanor spoke, the great dining hall remained suspended in stunned silence. Candlelight flickered across frozen faces. Crystal glasses stood untouched. The air itself seemed to hesitate. Sebastian's gaze sharpened. "The truth?" he repeated. His voice remained composed, yet something dangerous stirred beneath the surface. Eleanor met his eyes. For years she had feared this moment. For years she had swallowed accusations, endured whispers, and carried shame that had never belonged to her. Yet now, standing beneath the scrutiny of England's finest families, fear felt strangely distant. She reached into her pocket. The sight of the sealed letter drew immediate attention. Guests leaned forward. The Dowager Duchess stiffened. A shadow passed briefly across her features before her practiced composure returned. Eleanor noticed. The reaction lasted only an instant. But it was enough. "Not tonight," Eleanor said quietly. A murmur swept through the room. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "You make an extraordinary declaration only to retreat from it?" "I make it because I have spent 5 years being judged before strangers." Her voice never rose. That made the words more powerful. "I shall not continue the performance." Without waiting for permission, she inclined her head toward the assembled guests and departed. The room erupted into whispers the moment the doors closed behind her. Rain had begun before she reached her chambers. The storm lashed against the windows with relentless force, scattering droplets across the glass like thrown pearls. Darkness pressed against Blackwood Hall from every direction, swallowing the estate beneath a curtain of winter rain. Eleanor stood beside the fire. The unopened letter rested in her hands. The evening replayed itself endlessly within her thoughts. "I require an heir. Not excuses. Its purpose has already failed." She closed her eyes. The pain remained sharp. Yet beneath it lay something older. Exhaustion. 5 years of physicians. 5 years of remedies. 5 years of hopeful predictions that dissolved into disappointment. Every month brought renewed expectation. Every season delivered fresh scrutiny. She remembered endless consultations with respected doctors. Tonics with bitter tastes. Prescribed rest. Prescribed activity. Special diets. Endless examinations that stripped dignity away piece by piece. Always the assumption remained unchanged. The fault belonged to her. The fault always belonged to her. When society sought an explanation, it never looked toward powerful men. It looked toward women. Toward wives. Toward duchesses who failed to produce heirs. The rain intensified. A branch scraped against the window. Eleanor turned toward the fire and finally broke the seal. Inside rested a folded document. Nothing more. No greeting. No signature. No explanation. Only a physician's report. Her pulse quickened. Slowly she unfolded the pages. At first, the language seemed impossibly clinical. Dates. Observations. Medical terminology. Then her eyes found a name. Sebastian Blackwood. Her breath caught. She read again. Then again. The room seemed to tilt beneath her. The report detailed examinations conducted years earlier. Private examinations. secret examinations. The conclusions were unmistakable. The difficulty in producing an heir had never originated with Eleanor. According to the physician's findings, the Duke himself suffered from a condition that made conception extraordinarily unlikely. Eleanor stared at the page. The fire crackled softly. Rain battered the glass. Somewhere deep within the house a clock chimed. Yet she heard none of it. For years she had believed herself defective. For years she had carried guilt like a stone chained to her heart. Every cruel glance, every pitying smile, every humiliating conversation, every accusation, built upon a lie. A tremor passed through her fingers. Not because she hated Sebastian. Oddly, she did not. The revelation hurt because she suddenly understood how profoundly alone she had been. Nobody had defended her. Nobody had questioned the narrative. Not even her husband. Especially not her husband. She sank slowly into a chair. The report slipped into her lap. Another folded sheet fell from between the pages. A note. Short. Inside. She opened it immediately. You have been deceived. 3 words. Nothing more. The simplicity frightened her. Who had sent it? Why now? And most importantly, had Sebastian known? The possibility settled over her like ice. If he knew, then every cold silence had been deliberate. Every public humiliation had been intentional. Every moment of distance had concealed a terrible betrayal. Yet another possibility troubled her equally. What if he did not know? What if someone else had buried the truth? The Dowager Duchess's expression returned to her memory. That brief flash of alarm. That single moment. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Hours passed. The storm continued. The fire burned lower. At last Eleanor rose and crossed toward the window. Far below, lanterns glowed faintly across the estate grounds. Blackwood Hall appeared magnificent from a distance. Strong. Immovable. A monument to aristocratic power. Yet tonight its foundations felt less certain. Because secrets had a peculiar way of weakening even the grandest structures. She pressed a hand against the cool glass. For the first time in years she imagined a future beyond shame. Not happiness. Not yet. But freedom from undeserved guilt. The thought felt almost dangerous. A sudden knock interrupted her. 3 measured taps. Not loud. Not timid. Deliberate. Eleanor turned. Enter. The door opened only slightly. An elderly servant stepped inside. Mr. Whitmore had served the Blackwood family longer than most guests had been alive. His silver hair gleamed beneath the candlelight. His usually steady expression appeared troubled. My lady. What is it? He hesitated. The hesitation alone unsettled her. I beg your forgiveness for disturbing you at such an hour. You are forgiven. His eyes drifted briefly toward the papers in her hand. Something changed in his face. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Eleanor's pulse accelerated. You know what this is. The old servant swallowed. For several seconds he seemed to debate with himself. Then he closed the door behind him. The soft click echoed through the chamber. Outside, thunder rolled across the countryside. Inside, silence stretched between them. Finally, Mr. Whitmore lowered his voice. There are matters concerning His Grace that should have been revealed long ago. Eleanor felt the room grow colder. Who sent these documents? I cannot answer that. You cannot, or you will not? The servant's expression filled with sorrow. Before he could respond, footsteps sounded in the corridor beyond the door. Heavy. Approaching. Mr. Whitmore's face drained of color. He looked toward the entrance. Then back at Eleanor. My lady, he whispered, there is something His Grace was never meant to learn. The footsteps stopped directly outside. And the door handle slowly began to turn. The door swung inward. Eleanor's heart lurched. For one breathless instant she expected to see Sebastian standing there, his imposing frame filling the doorway, demanding explanations neither of them were prepared to give. Instead, a young footman appeared. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his livery. My lady, he said nervously, bowing. His Grace requests your presence in the West Library. The tension in the room shifted. Mr. Whitmore released a subtle breath. The servant's relief did not escape Eleanor's notice. At this hour? She asked. Immediately, Your Grace. The footman withdrew. Silence returned. Outside, thunder rumbled across the estate. Inside, the old butler stared at the floor. You know more than you have told me. His expression tightened. I know enough to fear the truth. Then speak it. Mr. Whitmore looked toward the dying fire. For decades he had served the Blackwood family. Loyalty had become woven into his character like thread through cloth. Yet tonight that loyalty seemed painfully divided. There are secrets that survive because powerful people require them to survive. Eleanor waited. The late Duke was one of those people. A chill moved through her. Sebastian's father had been a formidable man, respected throughout England, feared by nearly everyone who knew him. Even in death his influence lingered throughout Blackwood Hall. What did he do? The old servant closed his eyes briefly. He protected the future of the title. The answer revealed everything and nothing. Before Eleanor could press further, Mr. Whitmore bowed his head. You should go to the library, my lady. And you? His eyes carried profound sadness. I shall pray this family survives what comes next. The West Library occupied one of the oldest wings of the estate. By the time Eleanor arrived, midnight had passed. Rain streaked the towering windows. Firelight flickered across endless shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. Portraits of long-dead ancestors watched from gilded frames, their painted faces stern beneath shifting shadows. Sebastian stood beside the hearth. He had removed his dinner coat. The formal armor of aristocratic perfection was gone. For the first time in years he appeared less like a duke and more like a man. The distinction startled her. He turned as she entered. For several moments neither spoke. The silence carried too much history. Too much disappointment. Too many wounds left unattended. Finally Sebastian gestured toward a chair. We should talk. Eleanor remained standing. I agree. His gaze drifted to the documents in her hand. The physician's report. The note. The evidence. Something darkened his expression. Where did you obtain those papers? I believe that is the wrong question. A faint muscle tightened in his jaw. Then ask the right one. Her voice remained calm. Did you know? The question struck with visible force. Sebastian stared at her. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The fire crackled. Time seemed suspended between them. At last he spoke. Know what? Eleanor crossed the room. She placed the report upon a nearby table. Then she stepped back. Read it. He unfolded the pages. The transformation was immediate. His confidence vanished first. Then his composure. Then the carefully controlled mask he had worn throughout their marriage. As his eyes moved across the document, color drained from his face. No. The word emerged as little more than a whisper. He read again. Then a third time. The silence that followed felt enormous. Eleanor watched realization spread through him. Confusion. Disbelief. And beneath all three, fear. The Duke of Ashbourne looked genuinely afraid. Where did this come from? He asked. You truly did not know. It was not a question. Sebastian slowly lowered the report. For several moments he seemed unable to speak. Then he sank into a chair. The gesture alone revealed more vulnerability than Eleanor had witnessed in 5 years. My father arranged medical examinations shortly before our wedding. His voice sounded distant. I was told everything was normal. Eleanor felt anger stir. Not fiery anger. Something colder. More painful. And you never questioned it? His gaze lifted. No. The honesty cut deeper than denial would have. She laughed softly. The sound held no amusement. Of course you didn't. Eleanor? No. The single word stopped him. Years of restraint suddenly trembled beneath the surface. You watched me endure every accusation. Her voice remained quiet. That made it impossible to ignore. You watched society ridicule me. His eyes lowered. You watched physicians examine me repeatedly. The fire snapped sharply. Still he said nothing. You did not merely doubt me, Your Grace. The title sounded distant now. Formal. Almost strange. You sacrificed me. The words settled heavily between them. Sebastian closed his eyes. For the first time since she had known him, he appeared unable to defend himself. Because there was no defense. Minutes passed. Neither moved. The storm gradually softened beyond the windows. The fury of the weather had begun to exhaust itself. Inside the library, another storm lingered. Finally Sebastian rose. When he spoke again, his voice carried none of its usual authority. Had I known? Eleanor's expression hardened. You never wished to know. The truth landed with devastating precision. His shoulders sagged. Not dramatically. Simply enough to reveal the burden he carried. A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, he began speaking. Not as a duke. As a man. My mother died when I was 10. The confession seemed unrelated. Yet Eleanor listened. My father taught me that weakness invited ruin. his gaze fixed upon the fire. Grief was weakness. Another pause. Affection was weakness. The flames reflected within his eyes. Trust was weakness. Eleanor felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Understanding. The smallest fragment of it. Sebastian drew a slow breath. I spent my life learning how not to feel. His voice nearly broke. The sound startled them both. And eventually I succeeded. The admission hung in the air. Raw. Unpolished. Painfully sincere. For years Eleanor had imagined her husband as cold. Tonight she saw something different. A man who had frozen himself long ago and forgotten how to thaw. The realization did not erase the damage. But it changed its shape. Outside the rain finally ceased. Moonlight began emerging through fractured clouds. A pale silver glow touched the library windows. The storm was ending. Neither of them knew what would come after it. Eleanor gathered the documents. The hour had grown late. The conversation had stripped them both bare. I should leave. Sebastian looked up immediately. Something flashed across his face. Alarm. Not for the scandal. Not for the title. For her. The realization unsettled him. It unsettled her even more. She moved toward the door. Behind her, silence stretched. Then his voice emerged quietly. Fragile enough to sound unfamiliar. Do not leave this house. Eleanor stopped. Her hand rested upon the brass handle. Slowly she turned. The Duke stood motionless beside the fire. Gone was the man who had humiliated her before a room of nobles. Gone was the certainty. Gone was the arrogance. Only honesty remained. When he spoke again, the words were barely louder than a whisper. I do not believe I could endure it. And for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor saw tears shining in his eyes. Morning arrived softly over Blackwood Hall. The storm that had battered the estate throughout the night had vanished, leaving behind a countryside washed clean beneath the pale gold light of dawn. Dew clung to rose petals. Birds returned to the gardens. Beyond the grand windows, spring seemed to be quietly reclaiming the world. Inside the manor, however, change arrived more cautiously. Eleanor spent the following days expecting confrontation. She expected excuses, denials, perhaps even anger. Instead, she encountered something she had never seen from Sebastian Blackwood. Effort. Not grand declarations. Not dramatic apologies. Effort. At breakfast he remained seated until she entered. During estate meetings he requested her opinions. At dinner he addressed her directly rather than through polite formalities. Small gestures. Almost insignificant. Yet after 5 years of distance they felt astonishing. The servants noticed first. Servants always noticed first. Then the household staff began whispering. Soon the neighboring estates heard rumors. The Duke was changing. No one knew why. Not even Eleanor fully understood it. One afternoon she stood among the gardens, watching gardeners trim the first blooms of spring. White roses climbed trellises near the fountain. Their fragrance drifted through the warm air. Footsteps sounded behind her. She did not need to turn. She recognized them now. Measured. Confident. Sebastian stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence no longer felt hostile. Only uncertain. Like two travelers crossing unfamiliar ground. The roses survived the winter, he said. Eleanor glanced at the flowers. Most things survive when given proper care. The words carried an unmistakable meaning. Sebastian understood. His gaze lowered briefly. I know. For a moment she thought he might say more. Instead he remained beside her, sharing the quiet. Strangely, that felt more sincere than any speech. Days became weeks. The scandal never erupted publicly. The documents remained hidden. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Yet something else began spreading through society. The Duke's behavior. At social gatherings he no longer permitted careless remarks about his wife. The first incident occurred during a luncheon hosted by Lady Pembroke. A nobleman made a thoughtless observation regarding heirs. The comment barely left his lips before Sebastian interrupted. My wife will not be discussed in that manner. The room fell silent. The nobleman apologized immediately. No one had ever seen the Duke defend Eleanor before. By evening, half the county had heard about it. A week later another woman offered Eleanor a pitying remark regarding motherhood. Sebastian stepped between them. The gesture lasted only seconds. The impact lingered far longer. Gradually society adjusted. Whispers diminished. Mockery disappeared. Not because people became kinder. Because the Duke made it dangerous to insult his Duchess. Yet Eleanor remained cautious. Protection was not the same as love. Regret was not the same as trust. Still, each passing day complicated her anger. One evening she discovered a book waiting outside her chamber door. No note accompanied it. Only a pressed white rose tucked between the pages. The gesture startled her. She knew immediately who had sent it. Sebastian never mentioned it. Neither did she. A second book appeared the following week. Then a third. Each contained passages marked lightly in pencil. Poetry. Travel journals. Histories. Works discussing courage. Loss. Second chances. The selections revealed pieces of the man hidden beneath the Duke. Pieces she had never been allowed to see. And perhaps pieces he had never allowed anyone to see. Spring deepened. The estate prepared for the annual Ashbourne Charity Ball, one of the most anticipated events of the season. Hundreds of guests arrived. The ballroom blazed with candlelight. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden reflections across polished floors. Musicians filled the air with elegant waltzes. Diamonds sparkled. Laughter echoed. The entire county seemed present. Eleanor entered wearing pale silver silk. Conversations briefly paused. Not because of scandal. Because she looked radiant. Confidence had begun returning to her. Not the confidence of beauty. The confidence of someone learning her own worth. Across the ballroom, Sebastian noticed her immediately. For several seconds he simply watched. Then he began walking. Guests stepped aside instinctively. The crowd parted. Whispers followed. Everyone knew the Duke rarely danced. Everyone knew he and Eleanor had spent years appearing more like strangers than spouses. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Sebastian stopped before her. His eyes never left hers. "May I have this dance, Duchess?" The title sounded different now. Not formal. Cherished. Eleanor hesitated. Every gaze in the room rested upon them. Every expectation. Every rumor. Every memory. Then she placed her hand in his. The music swelled. Together they stepped onto the dance floor. The ballroom erupted into stunned silence. The Duke never danced. Yet tonight he danced only with her. His hand rested carefully against her waist. Not possessively. Protectively. Respectfully. As they moved through the waltz, the world seemed to fade around them. For the first time in years they looked like husband and wife. Not in title. In spirit. The realization frightened Eleanor more than she wished to admit. Because hope was dangerous. Hope invited disappointment. Halfway through the dance, Sebastian spoke quietly. "I once believed legacy was measured through blood." She looked up. His expression held none of his former arrogance. "Now I find myself wondering whether it is measured through devotion." The words settled deep within her. Neither spoke again. They simply danced. When the final note faded, applause filled the ballroom. Yet Sebastian ignored it. His attention remained fixed upon Eleanor. As though the crowd no longer mattered. As though she was the only person present. The realization left her shaken. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the candles burned low, Sebastian asked her to meet him in the library. The same library where everything had changed. Moonlight filtered through the windows. Firelight flickered softly. Eleanor stood opposite him. A familiar tension filled the room. Not hostility this time. Something more fragile. Something far more dangerous. Sebastian reached into a drawer and removed a document. Then he placed it upon the desk between them. She stared at it, confused. "What is this?" His voice remained steady. Yet sorrow lingered beneath every word. "Your freedom." Understanding dawned slowly. Divorce papers. Legal arrangements. Financial settlements. Everything required for her release. Eleanor looked up sharply. Sebastian met her gaze. "If you wish to leave," he said quietly, "I will not stop you." The words carried genuine sacrifice. Not rejection. Well, the kind willing to lose. And as Eleanor stared at the document, another sealed letter waited inside her chamber upstairs, one that had arrived that very morning from abroad, offering her a future far beyond Blackwood Hall. Dawn arrived beneath a veil of silver mist. The railway platform stood at the edge of the city like a threshold between two lives. Steam drifted from the waiting locomotive in slow white clouds. Porters moved among stacked trunks. Travelers exchanged hurried farewells beneath the pale morning sky. Lady Eleanor Blackwood stood apart from the crowd. A dark traveling cloak concealed her elegant figure, and a modest hat shaded her eyes, but nothing could disguise the conflict within her heart. The letter from abroad rested inside her gloved hands. A respected family in France had offered her a position as companion and estate manager. The opportunity promised independence, dignity, and distance from every painful memory attached to Blackwood Hall. Distance from humiliation. Distance from judgment. Distance from Sebastian. She had spent the entire night awake. Again and again she had read the divorce papers. Again and again she had replayed every conversation from the past weeks. The man she married and the man she had recently discovered seemed like two entirely different people. One had wounded her. The other had begun healing wounds he could never fully erase. Yet trust was not rebuilt in a single season. Love was not restored because someone finally learned how to apologize. The train whistle echoed across the station. Departure approached. Eleanor closed her eyes. 5 years ago she had entered Blackwood Hall believing love would arrive naturally after marriage. Instead she had found loneliness. Then came betrayal. Then truth. And somehow, after all of that, hope had returned. Hope frightened her more than anything, because hope meant she still cared. A porter approached. "Shall I load the final trunk, my lady?" Eleanor opened her eyes. Yes. The porter lifted the luggage. Another piece of her old life disappeared toward the train. The platform buzzed with activity. Yet she felt strangely isolated within the crowd, as though she alone stood at the center of a decision capable of altering everything. Far away church bells rang. The sound drifted through the morning fog. The train whistle sounded again. 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes remained. Eleanor looked toward the city one last time. Nothing. No carriage. No rider. No sign of Sebastian. A painful ache settled within her chest. She had not expected him to come. Yet some small foolish part of her had hoped. The realization stung. She lowered her gaze. Perhaps this was for the best. Some stories were not meant to be repaired. Some wounds healed only through distance. She took a step toward the train. Then another. The conductor called for final boarding. Passengers began climbing aboard. Steam billowed upward. The great engine shuddered. And then a commotion erupted near the station entrance. Voices. Shouting. The crowd shifted. Heads turned. Eleanor froze. A black carriage had stopped so abruptly that one wheel struck the curb. Before it fully halted, a man leapt from it. For a moment she barely recognized him. Because dukes did not run. They arrived. They commanded. They waited for others. Yet Sebastian Blackwood was running. Running through mud. Running through crowds. Running without dignity or concern for appearances. His coat hung open. His hair was disheveled. His breathing was ragged. The sight shocked everyone who witnessed it. The Duke of Ashbourne looked nothing like a duke. He looked like a desperate man racing against fate. Eleanor. Her name cut through the noise of the station. She stood motionless. Sebastian pushed through the crowd. People stepped aside instinctively. Not because of his title. Because of the anguish written across his face. At last he reached her. For several seconds neither spoke. The world seemed to disappear around them. Steam hissed from the locomotive. Porters shouted instructions. Passengers boarded. Yet none of it mattered. Only this moment remained. Sebastian struggled to catch his breath. You were leaving. It was not an accusation. It sounded like heartbreak. Eleanor held his gaze. You gave me the choice. Pain flickered across his features. Yes. Then why are you here? The question lingered between them. 4 years Sebastian would have answered with pride. With authority. With carefully chosen words. Today he answered with honesty. Because I cannot lose you. The admission struck harder than any grand speech. His voice trembled. Not with weakness. With truth. Eleanor felt her heart tighten. 5 years ago, she said quietly, those words would have meant everything. I know. His eyes glistened. The sight still felt unfamiliar. I know. The train whistle screamed. Final boarding. Time was vanishing. Sebastian looked at the train. Then back at her. And suddenly something extraordinary happened. The Duke of Ashbourne knelt. Gasps rippled through the station. Conversation stopped. Even the conductor fell silent. An aristocrat of his rank did not kneel in public. Not for anyone. Not for anything. Yet Sebastian lowered himself onto one knee without hesitation. The crowd stared in stunned disbelief. Eleanor stared too. The man before her seemed transformed. Not diminished. Human. For the first time in his life, he appeared free from the burden of pride. His voice carried clearly through the morning air. I once demanded an heir. Silence surrounded them. His gaze never left hers. I believed legacy was the purpose of marriage. A faint smile touched his lips. Set. Regretful. You taught me how wrong I was. Emotion thickened his voice. The mighty Duke who once ruled every room now struggled simply to speak. I thought strength meant never needing anyone. His eyes shone openly. It does not. The crowd remained utterly silent. Every person on the platform seemed captivated. Not by nobility, by vulnerability. Sebastian drew a shaky breath. What I truly required was courage. His expression softened. And I possessed none until I loved you. The words settled over the station like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Eleanor felt tears gathering. Not because he had finally spoken them. Because she believed him. At last she believed him. Years of hurt remained. Years of pain could not vanish overnight. Yet the man before her was no longer the husband who had humiliated her at dinner. That man had died somewhere between midnight confessions and spring mornings. This man had been forged from regret and love. Slowly Eleanor reached into her traveling bag. Sebastian watched her. Confusion crossed his face. She withdrew a folded document. The second physician's report. The report she had discovered only days earlier. The one she had not yet opened. She placed it in his hand. What is this? I think, she said softly, it belongs to both of us. Sebastian unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the contents, then widened. Shock swept across his features. The original diagnosis had been incomplete. Further findings suggested that children were not impossible after all. Difficult, uncertain, but possible. For a moment neither spoke. The revelation hung between them. Years earlier such news would have seemed miraculous. Now it felt strangely secondary. Sebastian slowly lowered the report. Eleanor. But she gently interrupted him. Tears slipped down her cheeks. A smile followed. Small. Beautiful. Certain. Sebastian, I stayed because I wanted a husband. The station seemed to disappear. Only their eyes remained. Not because I wished to give a duke an heir. The words froze him completely. Not the report. Not the possibility of children. Those simple words. Because they revealed the one truth he had spent too long failing to understand. She had never wanted his title. Never wanted his fortune. Never wanted his name. She had only wanted him. The realization shattered whatever remained of the walls around his heart. Sebastian rose slowly. Eleanor stepped toward him. Neither reached for the other immediately. The moment deserved patience. Then, at last, their hands found one another. No promises were spoken. None were needed. The train departed without her. The mist began to lift. Sunlight spilled across the platform. And as they stood together watching the morning brighten, the future remained unwritten, uncertain, and wonderfully imperfect. For the first time since their marriage began, neither feared it. Together they walked away from the station, not as a duke seeking an heir, nor as a duchess seeking escape, but as two hearts finally choosing each other.